All right.
Okay. You know, when I was a kid, I grew up in West LA basically, and what they were like, where you grew up. I don't even know you were born in Tahiti.
Yeah, no, I was born in Tahiti on a dining room table of a little hut in a district just outside of the main town, which is called Papeete. And it was on stilts over the water in 1926. And a Dr. Casio, my mother was 16,
Wow.
and the doctor who attended the birth was Dr. Casio, who was a very famous early doctor in Polynesia. He was French, and have no memories of that, of course, but of course I have a lot of memories as a result of all the photographs I have of my early years in Tahiti. I lived there for 8 years. There are shots of my father holding me and a convertible sedan Model T in evidence, that kind of thing. So horse and buggies were still very much in use. There were quite a number of expatriates there, like Carl Curtis of Curtis Publishing Company and various and sundry other Americans who lived in Tahiti. In 1928, when I was 2, my parents bought a property in a district called Otway, about 5 kilometers out of Papeete, on the road, which was then 2 pieces of white sand or coralline that ran through grassy fields. And because there weren't many cars, a lot of bicycles, and horse and buggies. I remember horse and buggies, actually. And I remember growing up in the district of Otway. I remember going to school there and studying with, I think I was the only American at the school. The rest were all Polynesians, Tahitians. My professor was a man named Francis Sanford, who eventually became not prime minister, but the head of the government in Tahiti. And we had a house that, we had a property that was divided by the road. There was the beach side of the road and a large property with a house where my grandmother and great-grandmother lived. And next to it was a beach house with a thatched roof that my parents used as a beach house and a place to, it was quite large, the room, to listen to music. We had 2 Victrolas, one at either end of the room, and there was also a bedroom and a bathroom next to it, this big room. And I remember my dad and mom listening to music. They'd put on opera and they'd have in those days, of course, it was turntable, and they'd have a record on one, and then the number 2 record would be on the there, so they could just switch. When one ran out, they'd turn on the other one and have a continuous concert. And I, remember listening to Beethoven and Bach, and it was the famous opera singer that they did Fitzcarraldo about.
Fitzcarraldo.
Yeah, well, who was that singer? You remember that? I want to say Fellini, but he never sang. And anyway, so it was. I remember being in school and having various toys that were toys that we made out of ourselves, little sticks with sort of a bolt going through, or just a nail through an axle, with 2 coffee cans on either side that were the wheels, and you had the top of the coffee can connected to it, and 2 strings wrapped around the stick so that you could steer it. And these were toys that we made ourselves because there wasn't an awful lot of, I mean, there were toys, but and we used to have roads. I remember being under school. The school was piloted on posts, and so there was a playground underneath the school where we had roads and things. I remember driving my little vehicle on those roads and racing kids and things like that. And I spoke fluent Tahitian, and French was my second language, and my third was English, actually. And that was because my mother being so young, I was raised early on, also by my grandmother and great-grandmother, and who had a house, and it was, for a writer like my father, nice to get probably a screaming kid out of the house so you could concentrate on your work. And so I spent a good deal of time with my grandmother and my great-grandmother. My grandmother was quarter Polynesian. Let's see, I'm a 16th. No, I'm a 16th. My mother is an 8th. My grandmother is a quarter. My great-grandmother is half. And my great-great-grandmother is a full-blooded Polynesian woman. And so I carry the bloodline of Polynesians in me. And I'm very proud of that, and joke about it, however, by saying that between these ears there's nothing but coconut, which is pretty much true. And in any case, we had a lot of, I remember I was ill at a very early age with chronic ulcerative colitis, and I had to go to, when I was 4 years old, I traveled with my father on a steamer to San Francisco and took a train to Rochester, New York, and went to the Mayo Clinic to be evaluated. And so they did, and pinned it down, I guess, to ulcerative colitis, and I came back to Tahiti when I was 4 years old on another ocean liner. I don't remember those trips too well at 4. I just know that this occurred. I don't remember anything about Rochester, New York. Let me think. Then And I don't remember too much about, in those days there were, my father was an intellectual, a writer, and my mother was an island woman who, very young, and hadn't had that much education, just the local schools and that sort of thing. She was full of life and a social artist. She loved having friends and gossiping and talking and putting on parties and dancing and having high teas and things like that, and helping my father to concentrate by keeping the house clear of noise and people who sought him out because he was quite famous, and those who came always wanted to come by and meet him and that kind of thing. In the 30s and 40s and the 20s, 20s he hadn't really hit yet. Hadn't written anything substantial. He had written mostly articles for, but no, he was on the contrary, he was a war hero. And in the Lafayette Escadrille in France, and had written about the war and all of that kind of thing. Anyway, so I remember that my father sought out other Americans and foreigners of various kinds at a club in Tahiti where they sat and talked, and because there was not much intellectual opportunity to talk about world politics and that kind of thing. My mother wasn't interested in any of that, and at home, so he had a group of friends that were from Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and stuff that had come to Tahiti and taken up a residence there to either write or make dictionaries, I know, Simpson, or to be photographers and all of that kind of thing. And they loved to get together and drink and talk and listen to music and that kind of thing. I remember and play pool. I think there was a pool table in the club, and I remember my dad used to take me to town. This was 5 kilometers away in Papeete, on the waterfront, this clubhouse, and I used to sleep on the not being an intellectual at 4 and not being an intellectual still. I slept on the pool table until Dad had probably had enough to drink and solve the world's problems and all that kind of thing. And I would ride on a little seat that he had caused to be built on the bar on the bicycle. I remember an incident one time when he came home and he was late for something my mother wanted him to arrive earlier for, and she was pissed, needless to say. And my dad I was still sitting when he came to a stop there, and she was ranting and raving at him, and he clumsily came to a stop, and then and then the bicycle wheel cramped, and we both fell over, and I remember my mother absolutely going berserk and beating him up and pounding on him and screaming and yelling and that sort of thing. I don't know why I told that story, but
Coming from the club?
well, yeah, but basically because that I'm just telling things that I remember at an early age. That was probably 4 years old, and I remember that very well. But I guess it must have been such a heated confrontation that somebody at 4 would like pick up on that and keep it in memory. In any case, it was a wonderful boyhood. I had a bicycle. I had toys. I had all my friends were Tahitians. I spoke the language. We swam in the lagoons. Actually, I didn't swim because I didn't know how to swim, and I never learned how to swim until I was about 14, 15 years old, I think. I know, strange. But I had a really terrible experience playing in the shallows of our lagoon with friends and chasing after tin cans. We had tin can. We were throwing it and running through the shallows, waist deep water for a child my age at 6 or 7, I think, was probably that deep and I remember chasing after a tin can that had been thrown. We were playing keep away, I think, or something like that, and I'd knocked it aside and ran towards it, and suddenly I was underwater, and I'd fallen into a tidal pool of some kind that was deep, probably 6 feet deep, and I didn't know how to swim. And now I'm at the bottom of this kind of conical-shaped sand pit, trying to get a breath and not. And I remember trying to jump from the bottom to get up to the top and not being able to make it. And then, I remember also that this is a very serious thing, and that I was going to drown, and terrified. But then I do remember also having the frame of mind to try to understand how I could get out of this situation. And I realized that if I went to the bottom, I could crawl out. I could grab the sand and crawl my way up, and which I did. And I crawled up to the lip of the thing and stood up and gasped for air. And I think I took in water at the same time. But that was a very frightening situation. I remember that very well. I remember some sexual moments that an older girl took me into a group of banana roots and things like that, and showed me a few things about what I would become very interested in later on in life. I remember that very well. Let's see, what else do I remember about that life? I remember my mother and father having these wonderful dinners for friends. There was a very tight social group that got together at various, at each other's homes, and taking turns. And they would, when they came to our house, Mother would prepare delicious foods and get beer and rum and everything flowing, and rum punches and cognac after dinner and all of that kind of thing, and have these wonderful lunches with all these intellectuals from the club and their wives, many of whom were Tahitians and whatnot. So there's always the men are here and the women are there kind of situation in social things, and they had what they were interested in, the women, and the men talked about what they were interested in, which didn't interest the women at all. And but they, after eating and whatnot, coffee was always served, and it was always served we ate in the main house, which is on the other side of the road, a very nice colonial, beautiful colonial, with a separate kitchen that had a breezeway going back to it. And the stove that we had was a wooden stove. Mother did everything on a wooden stove. My father, to get exercise, used to have people deliver logs, and he would saw it with one of those horses and put the log there, and then he'd saw it, and then he'd use an axe and split it and make firewood that would neatly stacked alongside our stove in the kitchen. And so after these parties of friends, they would retire to our beach house, and they would put on music, dance, talk, and always there was Tahitian style dancing, and the women would do all of that wonderful thing, and the Americans probably very awkwardly trying to keep up with them. In any case, I remember all of that very well. And I remember birthday parties, which were wonderful. And I got to invite who I wanted, and they were all Tahitians. And I have these pictures of myself with my friends, all Tahitians, and this little white boy there with them. But but I definitely felt like I was a Tahitian, and those are my roots growing up there, and very much still feel that that's my home, pied à terre, all of that kind of thing. But because of my ulcerative colitis, I needed to be where doctors could keep in touch. I was very anemic. I was losing a lot of blood.
Oh, was
And
that bad?
yeah,
So
no.
you actually were suffering from it as
Yeah.
you were living there.
Yeah, exactly.
Adjustment.
And oh, am I sitting on it? There.
So did it literally get worse, or it just became apparent to your parents that physical condition was something that they needed to factor in? Did your family have to make adjustments because of your ulcerative colitis?
Oh yeah, dietary things, and also the clinic had given my father some kind of medication that I had to take, hypodermic, shot in the butt every, I don't remember exactly how often, but I know I was on medication, and dietary things also, a lot of egg white, I remember, in my early days, for some reason or other. But there, the medical situation in Tahiti in the 20s and early 30s was not great. I mean, there Dr. Casio, that was about it, and native medicines, of course, which were barks and leaves boiled down, and all of that kind of naturalistic stuff, homeopathic kind of thing. So anyway, eventually, at 8 in 1934, so 26, that would be 8 years old, yeah. In 1934, my father and mother arranged for me to live with my father's brother and his wife and family in San Diego. in Mission Canyon. They had a little house up on top of Mission Canyon, and which I remember very well. I remember I remember things like the airport there. What's it called? Lindbergh Field. Yeah, Lindbergh Field. Remember Lindbergh? I believe. When did he make his flight? Was it 36 or?
Earlier than that.
Huh?
It was earlier than that.
Earlier, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember that, like,
St. Louis.
the airplanes down there, and those like his, and that sort of thing. My uncle was the sports editor of the San Diego Globe, and he had two. He had a wife who was Arabella, and a daughter who was Clarabella, and a son who was Harvey, who became the admiral of the Missouri when the thing was signed. You know, when the armistice was signed and all that kind of stuff. And Frank, who's still very alive, my age, and a wonderful, dear friend that, like, we were both the same age and everything. But when I came to San Diego, I'd had just the simple education I'd had in the public schools of Tahiti at that time. And so while I spoke English very well by then, I didn't, academically, I was way behind. So at 8, I started in the first grade. And I think it took me about 6 months to catch up to my grade. As soon as I caught on to things, they would skip me to the next grade, so I wouldn't be with 6-year-olds or 4, you know, that kind of thing. And so I jumped to, I forget what grade it was, you know, 3rd or 4th, or, yeah. And the 30s were very interesting, you know. That's shortly after the economic demise that we had in the country, and nobody had an awful lot of money, but my uncle had a car, and I remember Sundays that one of the things I looked forward to was the drives we used to take. We would get in the car, we would drive to, like, view the beach or view the mountains or view the beautiful homes in another district, or go to Balboa Park and play, and all of that thing. I remember the neighbor boys building flexi flyers for that race, you know, what do they call it?
Carts?
Yeah, carts that raced. There was a famous race that Soapbox Derby. Yeah, for Soapbox Derby, and we had soapbox derbies in Balboa Park on big long runways and things, and I remember being involved in as part of the team of somebody who was probably 12 or 13 or something like that, and pushing them into Balboa Park and that kind of stuff. And also I remember that, like, seeing a lot of doctors and being put on various diets and being anemic and having shots all the time to counter the anemia and various things like that. But I was healthy and vigorous and always no problems. I remember one thing back in Tahiti that sticks with me still was, like, going fishing with my teacher, who then became president of Tahiti.
Yeah, be careful.
Did I do something? Huh? Don't cross the arms?
Oh,
okay.
it became.
Right. I was probably 6, I would guess, 6 or about that age. And the fishing pole was bamboo with a piece of amount of filament on it and a hook. And he had some bait that he'd gotten cut from a fish, I believe. And he baited the hook, and then I would like throw it out and catch these little huddy. They're small. So when they get big, they're called something else. I can't remember, but the Tahitian name then was huddy. And I remember there were schools of them sort of out in front of you, and they would disappear, and then they would reappear. And I remember while I was waiting for him to bait my hook behind, seeing these fish there, and forgetting that he was baiting the hook, cast my rod out there and caught his, and buried the hook into the palm of his hand. You know what I mean? Oh my God! Oh, and that made a great impression on me. That like in my haste and thoughtlessness that I caused such pain to somebody, because it wasn't easy to get out. You had to cut it out. And he couldn't just, it was barbed, of course, and it was really deeply in there, and so it needed to be cut out, and it was traumatic for me. That was one of the first sort of traumatic experiences that I remember. And I remember that it taught me a great lesson about patience, about being aware, to wait so that you don't cause somebody a big problem. And so that's something that I think I've been able to to sort of remember and bring up from time to time when I started to stray from it, and remember to be patient. And it's one of the most valuable tools in my work as a cinematographer, that ability to like wait and not rush into something, to be able to like think things out calmly, and not be excited by something so that you make wrong moves. Anyway, get back to childhood. I'm sure I'll remember other things. This is sort of free form thinking going on here. I haven't thought about any of this kind of stuff until you brought up for me to try to remember about it.
Pretty much in the moment in Tahiti.
I was pretty much in the moment in Tahiti, and but the kind of things that were inspirational for me were boats, because there were no planes yet or anything like that coming into Tahiti, and my grandfather had a three-masted schooner, but he died when I was 3 years old, so I don't remember him. But I remember my grandmother very well, and she had a house in town, and basically where I grew up. And because my mother was very young. I mean, imagine a 16-year-old girl, pregnant and bringing up a child and taking care of her husband, who was 20 years older, and an important writer, and the people who came by boat sought out and to be with and meet and all of that kind of thing, and to deal with all of that. So I spent a lot of time with my grandma and great-grandma, and they had a place and she had a place in town. So I had another group of friends in town also. Cousins and a lot of relatives. She had, my mother had BB and Robert, two brothers. Yeah, had two brothers, no sisters. So I had uncles that and their families and that sort of thing. And kind of losing track of where I was going with this. You asked about what?
Mostly things that were going on outside of your immediate experience.
Oh yeah, right,
like
right.
An interest in the
right.
past, for instance, were there stories that your great-grandparent, great-grandmother, and
Yeah.
grandmother told that brought the past alive, your own
Yeah.
family history? Or, like I said, I became kind of obsessed with the future as a child.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
But not in the present, and I'm wondering what your non-present but more
Right.
imaginary.
Well, we had no
experience.
television or anything. There was radio, but I don't remember radio at all either. I don't think my dad had radio. They waited for the steamship to arrive from San Francisco, and there would be periodicals, and there would be papers and magazines and books. We had an extensive library. My dad had over 5,000 volumes in our house. So every room, the dining room, his office, various and sundry other rooms were lined with books all the time. And he read most of them. And I remember him reading my early stories and things like that. He always, when I was sitting on his knee being told a story before going to bed, I remember very well the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner and how that affected me. I remember that very, very well. And anyway, so again, I'm forgetting your question. Yeah.
It has to do a little bit with when your imagination.
Oh yeah.
came
Well,
into play.
it was mostly about things that were in my sphere. I didn't read or anything, of course, yet, and English or that kind of thing. And so I'm pretty much a native boy. And playing and doing the things that my friends were doing, and mostly out of doors and around the ocean. Remember 4th of July, we used to, the cruelty of children, we had little firecrackers, tiny little firecrackers. We would light them and throw them and to like stun fish. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. I know how kids are awful, cruel. I remember that kind of activity. I remember things bursting in your, in your fingers, and they were small, little, tiny firecrackers. But boats were the main kind of sort of things. They took you places, and my father would, when he was researching Mutiny on the Bounty, which was a novel he was working on, and I believe it was finished in 1932, and I would have been 26, would be 6 years old, right? I remember he had gone to, he took a boat to a schooner to Pitcairn Island, and during a storm at night, the captain was asleep, and he was suddenly thrown out of his bunk and slammed against the wall, and the ship had crested on a big wave and slammed into a reef. And and water started pouring in, and so he started getting out of bed and going out. This is all from reading the story that he wrote about it later on. But what I remember about it is eventually the waves picked the boat up and deposited it on the reef. And it stuck there little by little. It sort of wedged itself. It was quite a large boat, probably an 80, but probably a 90-footer or 100-footer, three-masted schooner. And and there were some nuns aboard and quite a number of passengers. And it was an atoll in the Tuamotu archipelago that they'd run into, and uninhabited. So nobody knew about this, and it was for some time later that they were able to be spotted, and they all made it to the beach, which was the Tuamotus are an archipelago about 1,000 miles long of atolls, and which are only this high out of the water, about 3 feet high, and with reefs around them. Some circle, make a lagoon. Others are just kind of long edges of volcanoes that have had coral built up on them, and sand gathered, and coconuts and growing, and that kind of thing, and they're beautiful. In any case, they were eventually discovered, and the most of the passengers and everybody were brought back to Papeete by a government boat that was sent. They took I think a skiff or a canoe. I think a fisherman had come by or something, and they had gone 20 miles to an island that was inhabited and had wireless, and got a government boat to come and take them back to Tahiti. But not my dad. Everybody arrived, no dad. My dad found a cutter, 20-foot, I think it was 20-foot, a 20-foot cutter, single mast and copra cutter, a little sort of almost like a lifeboat type thing with a dry area to put copra in. Copra is dried coconut that was used, was the main product of Tahiti in those days before pearling became the industry that it is now. Famous American corporation that owns all the Philippines and all over. They had coconut plantations, and this copra was moved with cutters and all kinds of boats into Papeete for sale. In any case, my dad took a copra cutter, and it was weeks before he arrived, because that little boat was the government motor boat and that kind of thing. And we just waited and waited and waited, having heard, that he'd been shipwrecked and all of that, and worried. And I remember, being thrilled when finally he arrived. And he wrote a book about that called Tale of a Shipwreck. So I remember that.
You say you didn't learn to swim till you were 14. Did
Yeah.
you have somewhat of a fear of the ocean or water?
Yeah, I still do.
Did that handicap you at all in terms of at the same time you had this interest in boats and you're surrounded by water? Was there
It taught me to be careful. It taught me to be very careful about that. I subsequently learned to swim, but not really that well. I still can't swim that well. But I've shot films. I shot a documentary in Fiji where I was in the water 6 hours a day for 3 months, going down to depths of 110 feet and photographing people diving and spearing fish and things like that. So at one time I was less afraid, but I have a great respect for the power of the sea and for its awesome irregularities, how storms can bring up giant waves. I've had so many experiences at sea where I've run into dangerous situations and stuff. Catalina Channel can be during the Santa Ana, and a certain kind of swell can be in a frightening channel to cross, and which I did, and when I was in school at USC. And one of my classmates had a 40-foot schooner, and 36-foot schooner, I think it was, or was it 40? No, it was a 40-foot schooner. And I went with he and two other classmates. And while the boat was harbored at Balboa, and while we were cruising out out of the Balboa Bay, Tony DeLapp, a dear friend of mine, he wasn't from SC. Marv Weinstein, Jack Coffer were classmates of mine in film school at SC, and myself, and Jack owned the boat, and Tony DeLapp is an artist friend of mine who was studying at Scripps College, Scripps, I believe. In any case, the four of us set out on a windy day, but nothing, we hadn't paid any attention to storm warnings or anything like that. And we had these delicious hamburgers that Tony had made, but the smell of all of that cooking and everything had traveled into everybody's nostrils. And as soon as we hit outside the breakwater, I mean, there were these immense swells. I mean, immense. They were as tall as the mast. And so we were like, and big wind, and we couldn't sail because we carried one sail, I think, just to keep us from yawing so much. But we motored. We had a little four-cylinder Ford motor that took us, normally would take you about 6 knots, but with the wind and the swells, we were probably doing 1 or 2 knots at the most over the bottom of the ocean. And Tony immediately got sick because he cooked the hamburgers, so he was not available for anything. And I hadn't done that much sailing at that time, and then, like Marv Weinstein, classmate, he got sick, so they both took bunks down below, and would come up every now and then just to rid themselves of that hamburger over the side. And Jack, who owned the boat, who had never been seasick in his life, about halfway across, he got sick. And so now here I am, alone at the tiller, never having sailed in my life before, basically, handling these enormous giant waves. They were probably at least twice as high as this ceiling. And you felt like you were climbing on a mountain, and then when you got on top, then you were sliding down that mountain. So it wasn't this kind of thing. It was this kind of thing, that and then that. So it took us 12 hours to get to Catalina that day. But that was amazing. So boats were were the things that inspired my imagination, and the stories my dad would tell also about the bounty and that kind of thing. Airplanes, I didn't look at that many magazines. We didn't have that many magazines and stuff. They didn't. That wasn't anything like your man going to the moon or rocket ships or those. I didn't have comic books to read or anything like that. And my father probably wouldn't have let me read it anyway. So it was boats, and all my ancestors were. My grandfather was a sea captain, and my great-great-grandfather, who came to Tahiti in 1845, I believe, was from Vermont. and his name is Richmond. And his father was a stockbroker, and they were very wealthy, and the son was a flake and didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. And his father, I think, wanted him to go into the stock market with him and that kind of thing. But he decided he wanted to become a whaler. So his dad bought him a whaleboat. And he got in the whaleboat, and he went down the East Coast and around the Horn and to Tahiti, and never caught a whale in that time. And met my great-great-grandmother, a full-blooded Polynesian woman, and fell in love. And in those days, it was a monarchy. There was a queen that governed Tahiti. And it was illegal for intermarriage between étrangers and Polynesians, because they didn't want the property to be passed on or anything else like that, to get away from them. So marriage was illegal, and but they were religious people in those days, and that religion had gotten there long before, and they wanted to be married, and he sold the boat and never went back, and stayed in Tahiti and had children and raised a dynasty. The Richmonds all over Polynesia, and I'm related to all of them in some fashion, in some way. And in any case, when after they had been together for a while, they wanted to. There were many expatriates living there: Germans, Spaniards, French, Americans, English, and they'd all taken up with beautiful island ladies, and my grandmother, full-blooded Polynesian woman, was a lady in waiting to the Queen, and she was a dear friend of the Queen's cousin, same age, and great-grandma made the beds and took care of the Queen, and all of that kind of thing, she and her friend, who was the Queen's relative, was in love with, I think, a German fellow, and they wanted to get married. And they, would speak to the Queen about it all the time. She said, no, 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 no. And then finally, and so many people came to her and wanted to marry. Religion by this time, taught that it was a sin to live in this way and all of that kind of thing, and that you must marry. And so they got to the Queen finally, and she said, all right, okay. Next Sunday, we'll have a big party, and I'll marry you. So all the people who wanted to get married gathered, and there was a big feast and a ceremony in which she decided to make a window in the law and marry these people. There were 50 couples, I believe. And so she made a window in the law and had a marriage ceremony and married them all at the same time. And then, it's a custom for grandmas and older people when in the family to give a name that encompasses both of you. You each have your own name, but then they give you a name that's that's the same name for both of you. When my daughter got married, my grandmother had my mother was dead, and so a lady in the district where I live gave them the name Hurima. Gave them the name Tuarea, which means a rock that travels, and my great-great-grandma got the name from the Queen, which gave it to all the people. You know, they all had the same name. All these 50 couples all had the same name, and it was Hurimanatane, Hurimanavahine, and which means he who changes the law and she who changes the law. And then after that ceremony, she changed the law back, and it was illegal from that point on to intermarry again. But already the window had been broken, and property could now be owned, and that kind of thing. And it was a sort of coming apart of that civilization.
What was it, in fact, that did have that result? Did have that kind of impact?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the world has been that way, hasn't it? I mean, yeah, it's got, you know, it's like no different than any other place in the world. You know, you try to keep somebody out and keep the blood pure and all that kind of stuff, and but that's not going to happen. You know, humans are humans, and they love one another, no matter color of skin or religion or anything, and so. But you know, and there's government trying to keep intact for their citizens this small. It's a tiny piece of land. Tahiti's 60 miles in diameter, I think, and with another little wing off to the corner. So he was a sea captain. Now.
Hold on a second.
Yeah. The dynasty their progeny went on and spread out. There's Richmonds all over the islands. Then they moved to other islands and had families. So Richmond is a very prominent name in Tahiti. So Richmond and my great-great-grandmother had family. And so they were half Tahitian and half American, basically English blood, their children. And I forget how many children they had. But then in New Bedford, Massachusetts, there was another family, English again, and with the same kind of thing. Somebody who wanted to be a whaler, and got his dad to get him a whaleboat and set out for the Pacific. His name was Captain Rose, and he sailed out into the Pacific and came to Tahiti and met the daughter of Captain Richmond and Hurimanavahine, and fell madly in love with her and married her and stayed and raised children in Tahiti. Another captain in 1903, Winchester. This was Rose, Captain Richmond, Captain Rose, all sea captains, came and married the children of Richmond, daughter, and which was my great-grandmother, who I knew and was partially raised by. And she would be, so My great-grandmother was half Polynesian. And the family that she and Captain Rose had married a sea captain called Winchester from England, who had gotten to Australia and had a three-masted schooner, which he sailed to Tahiti in 1903, and met the children of Captain Rose and my great-grandmother, who was my grandmother. So, so that's three: Captain Richmond, Captain Rose, and Captain Winchester, and their child was my mother, and who finally broke the chain of captains, boat captains, and married my father. And so that's how the bloodline flows through the feminine side of my family to me.
Very powerful pattern, wouldn't you say, of adventurous men from
Yeah.
Europe and America
Right.
coming to this very gentle, feminine, luscious place.
Exactly.
And
And all staying there and raising dynasties of themselves,
Yeah.
you know. And my grandfather was such a fascinating man, Winchester. He, of course, I never knew Captain Rose, but I did know my great grandmother, Mama Ruo, and who was half Polynesian, and my grandmother, Grandma Winchester, was a quarter Polynesian, and my mother was an eighth, and I'm a 16th, is the way it works.
but all the women grew up. All the women were Polynesian, even though by blood they were only quarter.
Yeah, exactly.
But they were Polynesian.
They were Polynesian, yeah, all Polynesians, right? Exactly, and so my upbringing was like very much as a Polynesian young person, you know, and getting all of the of the things, and because I lived with my grandmother and a great grandmother a lot, spent a lot of time with them, because my mother was so young and busy taking care of my father and all of that kind of thing. I had a good Polynesian heritage. In any case, my grandfather was a fascinating man. He was captain of the Tiari Taparo, the three-masted schooner, which traded in French Polynesia for dry goods and things. It was like a traveling hardware store, you know. They had medical goods, they had everything. You know, it was pharmacy, dry goods, needle and thread, and cloth to make dresses, and the whole thing. You know what I mean? And they traded for pearls that people dived for. They didn't raise pearls in those days. They dived for them. There were pearls all over, and these beautiful clams. I don't have any right here now, but they would you know, go to great depths to get them, and they would gather them, and that's what they would use to buy sugar, coffee, rum, cloth, needles and thread, medical supplies, et cetera, et cetera. And my grandfather had these mason jars, and he would like keep these pearls in mason jars. And when he had enough, and when he made his stops at all the various points in Polynesia that he traveled, he would come home and take his the money that he'd made, which was in pearls basically. He also brought copra back, usually stacked in high on deck, kind of like in sacks, burlap sacks. Anyway, he'd put out his green felt cloth and get a nice bright light over it and evaluate how much money he'd made over the trip, and so that he could buy more supplies and go out again. In any case, if a pearl is worth, let's say, $100 for one pearl, and two pearls would be worth $200, but a pair of matched pearls are worth $1,000. So he was not interested in like just single pearls, selling single pearls to pearl traders and things like that. He was interested in matched pearls because, for earrings and that kind of thing, brooches, whatever. So, so he'd like do all of this matching until he had enough to have made a profit when he sold it to people who took them to Japan and America and Europe and made beautiful jewelry out of them. Because I don't think there was a big business buying jewelry in Tahiti at that point, In any case, then there would be a lot of pearls left over, some irregular, some small, but like still, probably in those days, pretty nice pearls. And he'd give those to my grandma. And whenever they had guests over for dinner and a soiree evening, she would take those little matchboxes that are about this size and small matchboxes like that, and fill them with pearls and wrap them with colored ribbon and leave them as favors beside the plate or in front of the plate. I don't remember those days actually. I was told about those days because my grandfather died when I was 3 years old, and of course pearls ran out when when he did make those trips. But it's a long line of sea captains, so I'm sort of very connected to the ocean. I had no desire to emulate that strain or anything else like that. I had no desire to do anything except play and be a normal child and grow up and go to school and what was expected of one, get a job, get married, have a family, and die. That kind of thing. It was the expectation of life then. And
but boats were kind of something that men did, and they used those boats
That's
to
true.
take them places over the ocean to this very feminine place in the ocean. And the ocean is a very mysterious thing. It's a dangerous thing, as you said. It's something to have respect for. It's a beautiful thing, but it's something to have respect for. But these men had enough courage or enough desire or whatever it was to take these boats a long way, which ultimately led them to their destinies, which were to meet their other half, so to speak, their feminine, and to create this dynasty, as you said. I mean, it's a fascinating kind of.
Yeah, no,
legacy.
I'm so lucky to have had my forefathers and mothers have such an enormously interesting, I think, coming together formation. In any case, so that's pretty much the sort of family thing.
I wanted to ask you about, and I don't want to go too much longer because I said we'd do this for an hour.
Right.
So I want to take it one tiny little step, and then we'll take a break.
Okay,
today,
good.
We'll continue next week. This is your transition from Tahiti to the United States, and you talked a little bit about it, and the soapboxes and the driving in the car. But I was wondering a little bit about the emotional content of being away from Tahiti, of being away from your family, your homeland, change, like culture shock or whatever. Was there any of that?
There is. It's you're going into a new family that you don't know at all, and with another a new parental situation. My father's brother and his wife, and and the children that they had. And now you're brought into that. A stranger, related, but a stranger. And there are, there's that loneliness that you have as a child when you miss your parents and that kind of thing. But they were very supportive and very warm and treated me as just somebody, as one of their own. So, and I had somebody that was exactly my age, so that was really comforting to be with somebody that like was my age. And I wasn't there with older people or anything like that. I was there with Frank. And so Frank and I were real great buddies. Yeah, and that kept me from the loneliness that I would feel perhaps from time to time from my parents. But there were new friends, and all this new stuff with soapbox derbies and BB gun fights with people across the canyon, and on clubs where they're like 14-year-olds, and you couldn't get into the club because you were too young, and all of that kind of thing, and things going on in the club like wow, Jesus God, what's going on here? You know what I mean? Education of various sorts. Yeah, exactly. Which you are never part of because you're too young, but like the older boys were doing things that awakened you to aspects of life that you would encompass later on. Smoking, not drugs or anything like that. Cigarettes, that smoking and being caught and all that kind of stuff, and all kid stuff. Not really smoking, but just playing grown up, I guess. All of those things. Don't forget, this is 34 and 35. Yeah, different world, totally different world. I remember there was an exposition in Balboa Park that lasted a year or 2 years maybe, huh? I forget whether it was 34 or 35 or both. I think it was both. And I remember seeing TV. I remember walking with Frank into an exhibit where he could get into one room, and I would get into a different room, and there was a monitor on the wall, and I could see him and speak to him on the phone and see him in the next room, which was like astounding. You know what I mean? Just amazing. I guess that's the beginning of what's the cathode tube? That's radio, isn't it?
No, the cathode ray tube is the television tube.
Yeah, exactly. That was.
Radio's earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So you saw
But
one of those first transmissions.
yeah. Right. No, it was an exposition to show the new things of the world. You know what I mean? And like it was amazing to see that, and to know that you could like speak to somebody and see them speaking when you couldn't see them. That was magic. That was incredible. And various and other things. Of course, there's the Midway with watching babies being born and things like that. Freaks, the whole kind of thing that those expositions were about. But it was basically about. I remember watching somebody peel and sell potato peelers, which was brand new. It was a modern invention. I mean, normally you peel with a knife or something. But there was this thing and he could talk and like in seconds peel potatoes, which was amazing, And I remember that kind of product on Midway.
What else?
Let me think. Well, there were all kinds of scientific stuff, you know what I mean? I don't remember it that well. Science was never really um, something that I was terribly interested in, actually.
But gizmos were, I mean,
Uh,
it was a
Gizmos,
torpedo
yeah.
or
Yeah,
the little
right,
toys that you played
right.
with.
The eye-catching things, and you know well, new stuff like you know there was a telephone, as I recall, in those days, and but not connected with being able to see the person at the other end of the telephone. That was very easy to remember. Um, so anyway, that was 34, 35. I used to love to see airplanes. Go down and watch airplanes take off and land at Lindbergh Field. And the same kind of planes that he flew to, you know, to Paris and all of that. And go to school. I don't remember school that much, public school. I remember that my uncle and aunt used to send me out to the grocery store, which was a little corner grocery store in those days, to like buy sugar, cigarettes, whatever they needed, and that they said that I could spend a nickel for anything I wanted, and I remember this big pot of cucumbers, pickles, on the counter, you know, and I used to always buy a pickle and eat it, and it was so delicious. Um, you know, I remember having the friends we weren't gangs in those days, but we were, you know, close knit groups that had territorial feelings about this side of the canyon as opposed to that side of the canyon, and that kind of thing. I remember the BB gun fights, which were so frightening, and which nobody hit anything, but you know, but like. Uh, you know, and now it's more serious, I guess. It's real guns now across the canyon.
Assault rifles.
Yeah. So anyway,
Somebody knocking, did I hear a knocking sound?
oh, maybe,
Hold on, you're on a mic.
yeah. So anyway,
Somebody knocking, did I hear a knocking sound?
oh, maybe.